I tell you once more, please get out of my way. I don't want you no more. We're done here, boy. I know you think you're so fine, but you can't see it. I've been wanting to unwind.
Hello and welcome to Women Leading in Cannabis. I'm your host, Kyra Reed. Thank you for joining us. Our guest today is Kim Kovacs, CEO at the Arcview Group. Welcome to the show, Kim.
Thanks so much, Kyra. What a pleasure to be here.
Kimberly Kovacs is the CEO of the Arcview Group, a network of high net worth cannabis investors with more than 600 members who've raised $300 million for cannabis companies. As CEO, Ms. Kovacs sets directives and leads growth strategies for the Arcview Group and its associated companies, including Arcview Ventures, Arcview Collective Fund, and Arcview Market Research. Kimberly has over 20 years of executive leadership and experience across technology services and investment companies. As the founder and CEO of MyJane, she built a cannabis wellness technology platform, which was acquired in January of 2019 by Manifest 7. Prior to MyJane, Kim founded or co-founded 6 additional companies, raised more than $100 million in equity capital, and has been an active angel investor for more than 10 years. Most recently, she served as president of the Los Angeles Venture Association, where she launched the Canna Lava Strategic Group, designed to bring cannabis industry leaders together in LA. Kim brings a diverse skill set and broad range of executive experience to Arcview in a time of both growth and opportunity in cannabis investing. I am so excited to talk with you today, Kim.
Thanks, Kyra. Me too. Oh my gosh, you read through that and I feel like I'm 100 years old today. But yeah, lot there.
You've accomplished a lot in the industry.
You know, I feel like I've had every sort of layer between, being an operator, being an investor, being an advisor, looking at different regs. I feel like I've gotten, a very quick education in the cannabis space. But again, there's so much more to do and so much more to learn.
Tell us about your origin story. How did you come to find yourself launching multi-million-dollar companies in the cannabis industry?
Well, let's see. So, I really had a great foundation in tech and in startups and entrepreneurialism, if I can say that word right, and really as an investor. And one of the things that I started early on in my career, so I started out at Deloitte. I only lasted a few years at Deloitte. The structure was great, but I needed the freedom to explore. Right, and express myself as an entrepreneur, and so got into the tech space. But every single startup, I looked at it from an investor's lens. I thought, I'm going to dedicate my time to this startup. I'm going to fund this startup on my own, to get it started. And I had to convince myself that this was the best investment ever. And if I couldn't do that with myself, then how am I going to do that with somebody else? And so to me, that was really kind of my origin of how I approach things. I look at opportunities that way. And if I'm really ready to go in, kind of all in, there you go. And so I, had a number of companies. I will say they all exited, not necessarily successfully, but they all exited. And one was a very nice exit. Became an investor, like officially, invested in 17 companies. So I have a portfolio still of about 12 of those are still pretty active. And I decided, you know what, I need something new. I really wanted to try something different. And as I was looking around, coincidentally, my mother-in-law came clean and said she was getting off of opioids after 10 years of being an addict and going on to cannabis. And I thought, what? I mean, at first I was like, it just wasn't comprehending it. And I wasn't putting pieces together. I had no background really in cannabis. I had no real experiences in the industry. I knew people that smoked. I knew people that smoked when they had, chemo or other things and wanted to eat. And that was like my reference point. And it was just really phenomenal to see her transformation, like right in front of me, going from somebody who was so dependent on these prescriptions for pain relief to vibrant, beautiful. She could drive. She could talk eloquently. She started looking 10 years younger, like right away. And I thought, I have to learn this. I've got to get into this. This is incredible. And there you go. So I actually joined Arcview, Kyra, as a member because I wanted to learn more. And I wanted to be able to surround myself with other like-minded investors who knew the space and I didn't, right? I mean, I knew tech, I knew life sciences, I knew nothing about cannabis. And so for me, it was just such a great landing place where I could learn, I could bring my genius, and I could start making investments.
What a great story.
And I was going to say, and then it evolved because, I think everyone in cannabis, once they start to see the opportunities and different ways and means, it really kind of pushes you into something more. So being just an investor wasn't good enough, and that's where I started the company MyJane. So, it's really an interesting thing. I think once you start looking at cannabis, there's such a crossover between investors and entrepreneurs because of that reason.
Yes, absolutely. So, Women Empowered in Cannabis recently announced a collaboration between us and the Arcview Women Inclusion Network, which, I mean, we are just so over the moon about it, and so are the women in the community. It was one of the most popular posts in our group last month when the press release went out. And I knew that women needed more help when it came to funding, but I did not realize that it was going to be such a hot topic. We did an incredible clubhouse, an AMA with Jean Sullivan the other day. And the Women Inclusion Network is something that is really, really needed in this industry. How did you come up with WIN? And what is the primary goal for the cannabis industry and for Arcview?
So, when I exited MyJane and I sold to Manifest 7, I lasted probably about like 6 months. It's sort of the founder dilemma, right? You start a company and you exit, and then you either stay on and continue or you move on to something else. And so I decided to move on. And as I did so, I was recruited into Arcview. Troy was looking at his next gig, and it was just a perfect match for me because of my passion for being in the industry, being an investor. And there's a third leg to that stool, which for me is about women. And back in 2006, when I started one of my companies called Optionees, I was very conscious about having women as investors and women as board members in my tech company. It was a fintech company. And, at the time in 2006, it was really hard to find women investors. Usually, they would be sort of, co-investing with their husbands or different things like this. But I was fortunate enough to find a couple of women who were just starting this group called Golden Seeds, which was a group of investors, all women out of New York, and they were dedicated to changing the dynamic. And what they said is, which is brilliant, and I still believe this to this day, which is if women don't write checks, we are the problem. We are not going to have a solution here until we start writing checks into startup companies. And if we're not going to fund women entrepreneurs, who is? Step in. Don't lean in, step in. And it was so powerful. And Kyra, I just took that and ran with it. And, as I was building Optionees, my goal always at the end of that was to become an investor and to invest in women, which is what I had been doing then as now a member of Golden Seeds. I ran a chapter for Golden Seeds. We had 350 women, across all these different chapters across the country. So it was women investing in women companies. When I joined Arcview as a member, back before I became CEO, one of the things that was so powerful for me was the Women's Investor Network. And these were coffees and breakfast meetings and lunches that Jean Sullivan and Bobby Paley and a few other the pioneer women of Arcview said this is important here too. We need to get these women together. We need to have I wouldn't call it a safe space, but we need a place where we can really talk about women in this industry. And so when I joined Arcview, I said, you know what? Let's just not have a breakfast or a lunch. Let's really double down. If we're going to make real change here, we, all of us, have to put our money where our mouth is. And if we're not going to bring in women as investors, shame on us, right? Like I said, who's going to do it?
Mm-hmm.
And so we started really actively promoting the Women's Investor Network. At the time, we changed the name in January to the Women's Inclusion Network, because the other part is we are no different if we are being separate. We have to embrace every single person who wants to advance the cause of women in cannabis. And that's men, that's everyone. And so we are an inclusive network. We are a promoter. We fund women companies. We're all about diversity and inclusion. And to me, that's so important. And we will not see real change until we all start making those investments.
I think Step In is the title of a new book that needs to be written. I love that.
Yes.
I love that. And it's really, it kind of plays into the Leadership Summit, which we hope that you will be speaking at in mid-May, where we're going to be addressing power. How do women take power? How do they hold on to the power that they have? And how do we make sure that others in our industry get that power as well? So I love the idea of Step In. It's so much more powerful and potent than lean in.
And it's an active word, right?
Yes.
It's not passive. And I've been on my soapbox for years now about women writing checks, and we write checks. We write checks every day. We write them, for the health and wellness, products in our families. We, are 95% of that consumer spend. So we have so much power in our pocketbooks, and we just have been reluctant to fund women-run companies, and I don't know what it is still. And I've looked at and read and contributed to so much research, right, on why psychologically women have a hard time writing a check for a startup company, where they'll write checks all day long for, donations and nonprofits. And so it's part of it is education, part of it is getting comfortable, and then part of it is having a place like WIN, like WEIC, where women can come together and do things together. You can rely on others to help you, right, in areas that you're not real comfortable with yet. So you can learn.
The writing checks reminds me of an interview I did with Sister Kate of Sisters of the Valley. And she talks about the fact that women need to share their wealth with each other.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Hire each other, and we need to pay each other a fair wage and a fair price for our services and goods. So it's like there's a movement forming here in cannabis to make sure that women include each other in each other's wealth.
Absolutely. That's interesting you say that, because at My Jane, one of our so My Jane, for those who may or may not know about that company, so it was a startup company. And the reason I started it was really very specific. I was looking for products in the cannabis industry that were going to help me get some sleep. And at the time, I'm also very opportunistic, right? So as I was going to different investor events and things like this, I was looking at a lot of companies that were getting, a lot of attention, and they were talking about the products and how they were designing them. And, they had women in mind. And I said, well, did you even do a group of women's studies to find out if that product even works for them? Well, no, but the package looks really good. And I thought, oh, shit, excuse my French, they don't know anything about women. We're going back 20 years in marketing. And I said, oh, you can't just make it pink and say we're going to buy it. And so it really was a motivator for me to, find the right products that were going to work for different reasons, and to ask women what they wanted. I mean, just ask us. I mean, we are so good at telling you all kinds of things. We'll tell you exactly what we want, And so I said, okay, we're just going to ask the women what they want. And it was brilliant. I mean, they came back in just droves of, hey, I don't want chocolate because I'm trying to lose weight at the same time. I want to have no or low THC. I want this, I want that. And we were able then to work with women brands as much as we could, right? And again, this is, 2017, 2018, a lot of women companies are just getting started. But it was so important for us to engage other women entrepreneurs, and finding those companies that were, founded like, Kush Queen and others that, were founded by women. Kikoko Tea. I mean, just brilliant, women founded companies. So I applaud that.
So when you moved into the space at Arcview, and you really started to learn about investing from that side of the table, what did you find was really kind of the most concerning or surprising, upsetting thing that you learned about women and people of color as well, in terms of the funding that they're getting or not getting, or the opportunities that are not available to them or are available to them? What kind of rattled you when you really got to understand what's going on?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kara. And I would say probably one I haven't thought about enough. And I think one thing that we need to really look at is, how things were funded in the early days of cannabis. And I was guilty of this too, which is I went with the recommendations of people I knew who were already investors in the space, obviously, but also some newbies. And it was a little bit of FOMO. I felt like I didn't get a chance as an investor, as an angel investor. I mean, I was a member of like 4 different angel groups. I mean, I was used to certain things, right? The pitch, the process, the due diligence, the background checks, the this, the that, all of these things that made sort of this formula around a good angel investment. That didn't exist in cannabis. And it was really uncomfortable, to be honest, as an investor coming in, because there was no due diligence, really. There were no like deal rooms, I asked for, multiple years of financials. Well, they didn't really have those because, they'd been in the illicit market before. And
Mm.
now they were coming into the legal market. So there were all these layers, in cannabis that we had to sort of, peel back a little and I would say accept as investors. But I think that also created an atmosphere that was really not good for women or people of color because it was who you knew. It was back to the good old days of the boys clubs of, hey, I got a guy or I know someone and hey, you want to make this investment with me? And it was less around the diligence and more around who they knew and who was going to stand up for them. And that was how angel investing happened, 15, 20 years ago. Before it became a process, before it became more of an institution. And I think what we're seeing now is as we move into what I call the normal investment cycle, which is you got to have your stuff together. You got to have a diligence room. You need to have, if not audited financials, at least someone who's financially savvy putting things together, patents, the right lawyer, the right agreements in place. Do you have NDAs? All these things that are part of a checklist, we're now requiring as cannabis investors. So to be honest, I think this is actually great because it allows women now to come into this or to come back to this and say, this is normal investing. Aha, I get it. I'm not at a disadvantage because I don't know a bunch of people necessarily who are going to write big checks. I can go to a group. I can go to an Arcview. I can go to another venture or angel group that is now investing in cannabis, and I know the process, and I get at least a shake at it, right? Um,
Mhm.
to me, I think that's super important because we saw that too in the early days of other industries like the internet. I mean, I remember my first, internet-based company, and literally, if you had a .com at the end of your name, people were throwing money at you, and it was who you knew.
Yeah, I do remember that.
Remember that? I
It
was
was
like,
a free for all.
I'm like something.com. I'm like, really? That's not even a business. Doesn't matter. We have a website. It was just like, wow. Okay.
Wait,
So, yeah,
that just that is such a good point, because we all also know what happened when people threw tons of money at that industry. It completely collapsed on itself, and millions of dollars were lost.
exactly. And we're seeing that. We saw that. We're still going to see that in the cannabis space as these things sort of shake out. And, let's not beat ourselves up about it. It's just part of the evolution of an industry. And, those early investors, there isn't a lot to go on with comps and valuation analysis and all this because didn't exist. And
Mhm.
so let's just say, okay, we went through that process. Now we get a chance to really evaluate, like I said, things differently and create a more a fair playground for everyone to come into and say we're all going to be evaluated on the same things. It isn't just who you know, right? And I love that. I think it's great.
So, what is the cold hard truth about specifically women getting funded and how few of them, I mean, our numbers, especially in cannabis, are under 5%. So is it changing for the better or the worse? And what can women do to raise those extremely low numbers of us getting funded? And we've talked about writing checks, and we've talked about, getting yourself, excuse me, we've talked about getting your ducks in a row, making sure that your numbers are right and you've presented yourself correctly. But there are a lot of women that do those things. So what else can we do to help each other to take those bricks out of the wall?
So I'm going to be nice and then I'm going to get real, because I think there's two parts to this, as always, sort of with fundraising. Um, so I can go off of my own experience and kind of talk about that. I can also talk to the fact that, having run a chapter of Golden Seeds and seeing, 200, 300 applications per month come into our network from women-run companies, and how many we would actually bring on stage and want to see is a very small number. And we were completely 100% dedicated to funding women-run companies. So women, those of you listening out there, first of all, who are you asking to invest? Are you asking a friend? Are you asking an investor? Are you asking a private equity? Are you going for a bank loan? You need to know who you're talking to, and you need to understand what they invest in. So here's a really good example. Golden Seeds, in its first, started in 2006. So part of its charter is to invest in women companies. Well, a lot of women start CPG companies, consumer product companies. They would come to Golden Seeds with a great company, great idea, no traction. And we said, okay, right there on our website, it says if you don't have $1 million in revenue and at least a certain amount of EBITDA or a certain gross margin, we will not look at your consumer product company. But these women would apply anyway. They would look and say, well, maybe I'm different. That's our rule. And the reason we have that rule, Kyra, is because we invested earlier in that stage where it was just a great idea or they had a good concept, a few sales, not much. And what we found as investors is that it just takes so much between a couple $100,000 of revenue and $1 million of revenue is like night and day in the consumer product category. And in order to bridge that gap, Golden Seeds just didn't feel like we had the right people to assess that unicorn in the mix. We needed it to be at $1 million. So my point here is that, and this isn't just women, by the way, a lot of people approach this and they're like, will you do my investment? And I said, gosh, you know what? I'm a cannabis investor. Why are you showing me a candle? I have a thesis, and if you match my thesis, I'm going to take your phone call. I'm going to take your meeting. I'm going to listen to you very intently, but also keep in mind, if I have an investment thesis and I invest in cannabis, I'm going to know a little something about cannabis. And so you better know a little something about cannabis and be able to go toe to toe with me and come into the meeting. I'll make this my last part on my soapbox, I promise.
No, please stay on the soapbox. That's why we have you here.
All right. So first off, you need to create a list of 100 different investors to go after with your startup company, and know that only 10% of them are even going to take a phone call. Okay?
Okay.
10%. So if you only do 10, that's one. Okay? It's math. So not everybody's going to be enamored with your deal. Most people are not. You're going to have to, it's a numbers game. So you just got to keep at it. Every meeting you have is a learning experience. So when somebody tells you your product is shit, ask them really specifically what shit means. And then take that to heart and understand why they're saying it. They're not saying it because they don't like you. They're not saying it because, they don't like the way you're dressed or, whatever it is. They are saying it for a reason, and you need to not be emotional and not get defensive and try to understand what they mean by that. And then the next phone call that you have, incorporate that feedback to some extent, right? I'm not saying completely change your business, but understand why they said it, and maybe they're not going to say it on the next phone call. So fundraising to me is about learning. right? It's like learning a sport. You learn how to swing a golf club, you make a little adjustment, you swing it the next time, and pretty soon you're going to hit that ball straight down the fairway and it's going to be beautiful. But it's going to take you some time to get there. And so you have to be really open during the process to feedback and not getting defensive. So, women, I'm going to come back at you again. Sorry, it's my thing. Leave the emotions at the door. So a lot of women would come into Golden Seeds, and I was actually surprised that they're sitting across the table from me telling me that I'm not investing in them because they're a woman-run company.
Oh, wow.
Right? And I'm like, wow, okay. So we have one mouth and two ears. And my mom always said, God designed that for a reason. So shut the mouth, open both ears, and listen. I said, we're not going to invest in your company because of XYZ. It has nothing to do with your gender, your race, your sex, any of that. It has to do with the company in which you presented. And so, I think that's a really big thing. Fundraising is not personal. These people aren't your friends. These people aren't your, family. These people are here to make money off of the deal that you have. And if you come to them with the most kick-ass deal in the world and something where they're like, oh my gosh, I look at investing like this is an opportunity. I'm presenting somebody, if I'm really in it, I'm presenting somebody with an opportunity to join me in making an incredible company with an incredible exit and an incredible return. That's how I approach it, right? And so we as women, we have a tendency to associate money with our own personal worth.
Mm-hmm.
Don't do that. It's hard. I get it. It's really, really hard. This hasn't been ingrained in us, Kyra, for hundreds and literally thousands of years.
And reinforced and reinforced and reinforced.
Yes, yes. And I mean, honestly, I've raised a lot of money. I have sat with the biggest bigots in the world and the most sexist guys in the world. And yes, they've talked about how I've looked and my outfit and this, and do I want to come to their hotel room and all these other things. I'm just, no, thank you. And I move on. And I put him in the 99 category and not the 1 out of 100 that I would want to do business with. And pretty soon, you know what happened to some of those guys? They're not around either because, a lot of people just said, no, thank you. And they move on. And so I think for us, we just, I know it's hard. I don't do it all the time either. But, if you can come at this very disassociated, right? Take yourself out of the equation and just present it as a company. And this is it. And people always say, this is your baby. Well, that's the worst thing to say to a woman founder.
No kidding.
Right?
Yeah.
Because we're maternal. And I mean, we freaking lay in front of a speeding train to save our children. Guess what? Men don't do that with startups.
Interesting.
Right?
So there's a little bit of mindset shifting that needs to happen.
Yes. And only you can do that. I mean, only we can do that. That is also so powerful. Think about that. Think if we'd shifted our mindset just slightly and we disassociated ourselves and our person of who we are, personally with the company in which we're starting. And we're there to, like I said, be an investor, not emotional, look at it as a business and an opportunity, and we sell it as an opportunity. Just think about how maybe that might change the funding dynamic a little.
That's really interesting. So many women that I know who are looking for funding, they've got several employees, they have big dreams. There's a lot riding on their need for this funding.
Yep.
And so they walk in already a nurturer with the weight of the future of their employees and their big dreams. And it creates a lot of emotional intensity.
Yes.
That is, right? That comes to the table and can work against them. And, in a way, though, those are the things that make them a really good leader.
Yes.
And statistically, when you fund women, they do better than men.
Right. Because of those reasons. And I'm not saying don't have those emotions and connections to your company, just not right then.
Okay, so I asked Deborah Johnson this the other day when I was interviewing her, and I'm curious to know, since we're on this topic, what your response is to this. So if we were to blow up the entire funding system, as we know it today, everything we've talked about, it just blown to bits, and we had to build it anew. What could we do differently in rebuilding it to ensure that more women and people of color and other marginalized groups get to participate in the investing system? Because, I mean, look, there are things that we can do to change it, but there are implicit biases in the system. We're only at 3% in cannabis.
Yeah.
So what is it about we can change, but what is it about the system that needs to change?
Well, boy, that's a lot to unpack there. And I think there's so many different pieces to it. So if we just look at sort of cannabis in general, cannabis is already coming from behind. You know, there isn't the same dynamic when I use the example of, the internet bubble or burst or boom or whatever you want to call it, right? There wasn't this layer of federal illegality, right, on the internet where if you walk into, and I'll just use like Tech Coast Angels, they're SoCal, they've got 5 chapters, they got 300 members. They're probably one of the most premier angel groups for technology. So if you walk in there and you have a business that, is still federally illegal, they're not going to see it, right? You're not going to have access to that group. And then on top of that, if you do have individuals who may not work as the group, but now work maybe just as their own, and they do the investment, they're going to say, well, how am I going to exit this deal? And if your real only exit scenario is to look at them in the eye and say, in 18 months, we're going to go public on a very small Canadian exchange with a lot of really wonky little things that you got to do in order to get there, they're going to look at you and go, are you freaking kidding me? What? So cannabis, yes, we have a very small amount of percentage of capital in cannabis in general, right? So if you take your pool of 100 people, you now are now counting it down to 20 because the 100 that you might have started with, 80 of them aren't going to touch your deal anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because now we've got this really funky exit thing, I think what you said is really interesting. I think cannabis is trying to mold itself into these other things, which once federal legalization happens, that's a really easy path. But in this interim period, it's really, really hard. Arcview has a broker dealer. We started Arcview Capital last year. Just that in itself, I mean, it's great. I'm so thrilled to have it, but it is so difficult to work in a structured financial system that requires federal legalization, and you're not, and you're trying to work in an industry and bite at the edges, meaning it's an ancillary business. It's not plant touching. Just say that right out loud a couple times. And it's just kind of funny if you think about it, right? We're in the cannabis industry and you walk into somebody and say, we're not plant touching. Whoa, okay, then what are, then technically you're really not in cannabis. You're in some other type of business like software or marketing or whatever. And you just happen to have cannabis clients, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
so if you have to tell somebody that you're not plant touching in order to get their investment, then it's different. It's just so there's, like I said, there's so much there to unpack, but I think that where we have an opportunity and where I think this could actually be a blow up and be a level playing field is crowdfunding. What I mean by that is the crowdfunding rules under the Jobs Act that Obama approved way back when allows for non-accredited investors to make investments now up to $5 million starting Monday, the 15th of March. Not sure when this is going to air. So March 15th, the rules are changing so that $5 million can be raised by a single company in a crowdfunded platform from non-accredited investors. So Kyra, this is huge for cannabis. Huge. Because what accreditation means, for those of you who may or may not know this, is that you have to have a certain amount of income, you have to have a certain amount of net worth. And fortunately or unfortunately, women and people of color and, people in disadvantaged communities don't meet that requirement. They just don't.
Sorry, wasn't the limit before, because you said it just went up to 5 million, wasn't it limited to 10% of your income?
There were some limitations. Well, it's $5 million for the company. It used to be $1 million.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so you're capped at $1 million. At least that's my take on it. I'm sure there were some other exceptions and various things like this, but you were capped at $1 million. Now it goes to 5. Also, the definition of accredited investor has also loosened up a little bit. So back to your initial question is if we're going to disrupt how startup companies and businesses are funded, especially in the cannabis space, then let's not just follow the playbooks that are out there, which we do. I mean, we have a venture firm, we've got an angel network. I mean, we've got all these things and we follow that playbook, but we are also introducing like this crowdfunding where this is a new playbook. This is something we get to decide on. We get to work through. And if we do it right, it really opens up cannabis investment to everyone. And to me, that's what's necessary because cannabis businesses, here's the other part. Not every cannabis business should be on a path to an exit, right? If you want someone of color or in a disadvantaged community to have a business, to really make wealth, to create a legacy, company or store or whatever, or have something multi-generational, you can't take angel money. You really can't have a crowded cap table of people who want you to exit in 5 to 7 years, right? It doesn't work that way. But if we crowdfund or we do it a little differently or we open up other avenues, then that person can keep that business and keep it for 20 years, 50 years, right? It becomes a family business.
I don't think that a lot of women understand that very simple difference between, I want help growing my company, but you want me to sell it? Are you kidding? It's my baby.
Right. There you go. Back to the baby, right?
Yeah.
I know, Kyra, and it's so hard. And it's one of the things that I've been working at. I think a lot of people have been working at is sort of educating, what this system is. I mean, um, if you join the military, right, and you say, I don't want to have my hair cut or I don't want to wear the uniform, well, then don't join the military, right? There's rules. They operate in a certain way. There's requirements in order to be part of that. There's requirements. And if you're going to go to an angel group or you're going to go to a VC or a private equity firm or what have you, there is an exit provision. And sometimes that's even written into the documents that you have to exit within a certain amount of time or they can force the sale of your company. But don't think of it as negative. Think of it as something actually positive. So I'm an investor, right? I have 17 companies I've invested in, 12 of which are still going on. I want those 12 to have an exit. And the reason is not just to make my money back, get paid and make a return and all this other stuff, but now I get to take that capital and I get to go invest in another company.
Mm.
Right? If I only have a certain amount of money that I've allocated to make investments in startups and I put it all in and it sits there for 10 years, that's not doing anybody else any good. It's just sitting there. I'm out of the market. No more am I an angel investor. But if I can start getting returns on that money and I can start recycling it, then I can go put it into another company and help them and another company and help them. And you see what I'm saying? So it's perspective. I mean, we can always say, oh my gosh, they want me to sell my company. Yes, they do. So that they can take that money and they can go invest in somebody else and make that dream come true.
And you can go start another business.
Exactly.
So we've talked about the companies that, you've got to show $1 million or more in profits every year. And then on the other side, we have crowdfunding.
Yeah.
What do you say to the women who are in the middle there, who need $50,000 to just get over that hump, or who are just under that million? Maybe they're at $500,000, but they can't take that next step to scale unless they have money. What do you do with them? What advice do we have for them?
So that's the hardest zone to be in because
That's where everybody is.
that's where and a lot of people are. And if you look at every sort of startup, there's a great thing called the Halo report. It's done out of gosh, I can't remember the name of the organization. I'll remember in a minute. That puts this out every single year, and it's been studying angel and startup companies for probably the last 20 or 30 years and the cycles. So 90% of all startups fail, and all 100% of all startups fail because they run out of money. I mean, it's just that's it. It's capital intensive. Um, so, we always kind of had a saying with, in the startup community, which is you need to be ready to kind of quit your job. And your job is something that's going to pay the bills. In the meantime, you're going to have a startup company. And there's a crossover point. And so you're going to have to really figure out how are you going to fund your company until you meet the metrics of an angel group or a group of investors to take it to that next level. That's why we call it friends and family. So if you're going to start a company today, go get a whole bunch of friends. I don't know if you can expand your family, maybe, but go get a whole bunch of friends who are willing to even put in a small amount of money, all right, to help you at the right time get to that right place. And it's so hard. I hear you. God, I wish there was a better answer to say, hey, go here or go there. It is always a struggle for founders to get to that first level where they're able to take in a couple $100,000 from an angel group. Before that, it's really just shaking the bushes and who do you know and who's going to help you with this, or are people going to work for free? Are they going to work for stock? Are you going to have consultants versus employees? And really keeping your burn down to a minimum, but there's real no good answer for that, to be honest with you.
And that is part of the question of blowing up the system, because this is a place, start with friends and family. Well, not everybody has friends and family that have money.
That's true. That's true.
And it's often women and people of color that are in that situation.
And crowdfunding can help, but it's also not going to be the be all end all for it either. I mean, if you don't have a business that's really sustainable yet, that's going to be tough on crowdfunding too. And there's crowdfunding platforms that are not equity based, and in certain parts of the cannabis space, like hemp and CBD, those are allowable. But, there are things like Indiegogo and Kickstarter, but you have a requirement to actually make product with those funds, So it's, people are buying things in advance. It isn't easy. And I would say that, and that's why there's such a high failure rate. The first year of a startup, it's 90% failure.
Those are really painful numbers for a country that prides itself on entrepreneurialism and small business. We
Yeah.
need more help.
We do, but I also think we also need to get really, really clear on what sort of an entrepreneur is versus an inventor.
Mm.
And also, you know what? It's okay to have a job. It's okay to have a career and not be an entrepreneur. I also see a lot of people kind of moving and becoming an entrepreneur because it's a saving grace when they've lost their job. Or it's
Mm.
something they can say, God, I hate my job. I'm going to quit. I'm going to become CEO of my own company. And all of a sudden, their LinkedIn profile looks a whole lot better, right? They're founder and CEO of, something. And
Yep.
in reality, they didn't do it for the right reason. They did it because they were in a bad situation before, and that didn't work out for them. And so they were like, oh, I'll do a startup. I'll start a company. And, it's like, no, that's the only startups I've had that have been successful. And believe me, I've had, 6 of them. Well, yeah, 6 of them now were the ones that I did with intention. They were the right product, the right fit, the right market, doing a ton of research and finding that white space, whether it was a MyJane or an Optionease or an Oryx Energy or what have you. We really intentionally went after that. It wasn't because I needed a job or I'd been long time career and needed a change and I was burned out, or I wanted to be my own boss. I mean, we hear these things all the time, and unfortunately we teach that in biz school, which I come in and guest lecture at a bunch of schools and sometimes they invite me back after I say that, and sometimes they don't. But although the university should love me because I'm like, do not drop out of school. I'm like, whatever you do, finish your education.
That is good advice.
But why are you doing a startup? Would you invest if you had $1 million and this wasn't your idea and somebody came to you? Would you invest in that company?
That's a good question.
Right? And if the answer is no, then what the hell are you doing? You know? Sorry, Kyra, I'm kind of, I know people like to hear the warm fuzzies from women.
No, that is why we had you on, and I'm so grateful that you are being honest with us, because far too often people in positions of power just want to say the warm and fuzzy.
Yeah. I'll talk about warm and fuzzies. Hey, when I find the right company and it is spot on and somebody's walked in and I don't care who they are, like I said, man, woman, child, I don't, doesn't matter to me. I am all about helping that person 100% because that is the genius, right? That's the exact thing I'm looking for, which is they nailed it. They got it. And I get excited because they're excited and they know it. They know if they're not getting an investment from me, they're going to get it from somebody else because they're onto something.
Well, let's talk about some more things you might be excited about. I want to know what you are most excited about when it comes to legalization and also what you're most concerned about. But let's start with what are you most excited about the prospect of legalization in the United States?
I think it's twofold. Obviously, it opens up investments like nobody's business. I mean, now you could literally, once it's legal, I mean, people invest in startup companies out of their retirement accounts, right? And that now gets opened up in the legal cannabis space. We don't have to, put things on a checkbox, which is, do you have a bank account? I mean, that's the funniest question I ever think I asked somebody. Again, going public in Canada, and do you have a bank account? I mean, we don't have to ask or be afraid of those questions because that's sort of a natural. So I think it just opens up all sorts of things. I don't think it's nirvana like some people might think, like all of a sudden, oh my gosh, cannabis, you can get it anywhere. You can send it in the mail. You can do this. It's going to be a little bit longer time as states figure out, what do they now do with their own cannabis regulations in light of it being federal. So I think the biggest thing is the banking system, which has to change, which is great. I think the second layer is that product availability will be a little bit more open to people who need it and have taken that war on drugs mentality and said, until it's federally legal, I'm not going to do it. So I think there's now this great opportunity to bring in net new consumers, right? Net new investors. And then the third layer is education, research, opening up the universities. To me, that's actually the most exciting because I think there's so much about this plant. We just don't know, right? I mean, we're relying on anecdotal data. I mean, I have a really good friend of mine. She's my best friend. She was my business partner, my Jane. She's taking cannabis for cancer. She's got stage 4 breast cancer. And she's been on cannabis routine for 2 years with a lot of efficacy, And I'm like, oh, if we could get this into research mode, I mean, how amazing is this going to be, right? So those are the things that I see are the sort of silver lining of federal legalization. Not all of it's silver lining, right? We've had a protected industry. Let's be honest. States have protected businesses. States have protected little fiefdoms. If you want to sell pot in Orange County, California, you have one city. You have Santa Ana. That's it. Guess what? City of Santa Ana is living fat and happy right now because they get all the tax dollars and they get, but now where I'm at in Laguna Beach, we can now have it in Laguna Beach. We could have it, in Newport. We could have it anywhere. And, those are going to really affect the licenses that were issued in Santa Ana. They're going to affect, people's access to cannabis. And, a lot of money will be lost.
And what are you most excited about in 2021?
Yeah. So I think I said this a little early in 2020, and I'm still kind of licking my wounds on it. But I'm going to go double down on this statement, which is momentum. So this is my word for the year. And I'm really excited about the momentum that we're seeing. And it isn't just one place or another. It isn't the fact that cannabis was deemed essential during the pandemic. It's not the fact that we now have vaccines that are coming and we're probably going to start getting together in person again. Um, it's the federal attention that we're now getting with cannabis and really people looking at it across both sides of the aisle. There's momentum there, right? There's momentum in the investor community. There's momentum in social justice and social equity programs that I have not seen, that I think is the crux and such a necessary component. You talked about redrafting how funding and everything happens in cannabis. That to me is essential, because if we're really, really going to go back to the roots of the cannabis industry, we have to be very conscious of how we develop this going forward. And to me, the social equity and social justice programs, they're not charity, they're not handouts, they're opportunities to make money, but doing it in a way that we all feel is necessary. And so I think there's just, again, a lot of momentum. There's a lot of really cool things happening. And I am just thrilled. I'm so thrilled to be in this space. I would never in a million years, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, did I pick an industry and I'd be like, well, I like dabbling in tech and being in this. I am all in on cannabis and I'm going to be here for a long time.
Well, we are very lucky to have you, Kim. Where can people reach you or learn about Arcview and the Women Inclusion Network?
So I would say generally just kind of hit our site, which is arcviewgroup.com. And we have, the Women's Inclusion Network is part of that. We've got our ventures, we got our consulting. So we got a little bit of everything for everyone. We're kind of an ecosystem, if you will, about the business of cannabis. And so we're just here to help.
Well, thank you so much, Kim, for your time. I could sit and talk with you all day, but unfortunately, we have to wrap it up. So thank you for your time and thank you for sharing your journey with us today.
Oh, Kyra, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate it.
Ladies, thank you for tuning in. If you haven't yet joined the Women Empowered in Cannabis community, go to our brand new website at women-empowered-in-cannabis.com. There you'll find lots of information on our new membership offerings for women working in cannabis, including a great deal that the Women Inclusion Network at Arcview has partnered with us to do a discount on a joint membership. So you can find out information there or at the Arcview website. WEIC is a community that provides resources, connections, events, and content to women working in cannabis in the US, Canada, and around the world where there's an interest in cannabis legalization. We welcome women who are currently working in cannabis or curious about taking a leap into the industry. Consider becoming a supporting member or supporting business for benefits and access across the network. And join us next week for another conversation with women leading in cannabis.